Would you say a messy workstation or a tidy workstation is better for creativity and productivity?
I think it depends on the person. Some folk, they need to start the day again at the same point as the previous day, and for that reason a clean workspace is ideal for them. Other folk have a mess of different ideas that are half finished from the night before, and as a result it has to be exactly at the point where they left it the night before. I vary in extremes. I'm either that or the other. Where if I'm working on the last record, for example, there'll be loads of messy ideas, but I leave the workstation exactly as where I left it the night before, and then I revisit it. The album before, though, it was all about cyclical, notions of finish it, tidy up, leave it at the same space for me to find it the next day. So I think it can vary even with the same person as I've just shown. But yeah, whatever works, I suppose, in terms of what suits you in terms of putting out your best work, I guess.
In terms of the new record that you're talking about there, at what point in the process did those patterns start to establish themselves the way that you want to work when you're constructing it?
I think because the new record was me writing to the strengths of my live band, there was definitely more of a messy process of, okay, I'm thinking of outside me, and I'm thinking in terms of my two drummers, my wife who plays flute and keys, etc., and integrating their personalities and the strengths of their own styles into the music. That in turn just naturally made things a lot more messy. Not convoluted as it might seem from the outside, but messier in that you're leaving an idea half finished and revisiting the next day going, oh, what if this person came in and did this to this song and whatever. And there's a song called I Whitewashed the Old West, which is near the end of the new record, and that's one of my favourite tunes off the record for the reason that everyone from the live band is on it, and it's the only tune that has all three of them in it, and all their personalities shine through. And that was definitely a very messy leave the workstation, come back to it and keep working on it, and many different drafts of it, whereas the prior record was a very, open and shut, each song was done, in a finite number of things.
Well, I was going to ask as well, when it comes to topics, but the first record with the Indian caste system and the new record with Bollywood, very dense, kind of complicated subjects. How do you go about kind of approaching them in a way that it doesn't feel like you're underserving them, but at the same time you're simplifying them down so that they can, resonate musically?
It's quite natural, because I think for the first record it was very much the caste system is bad, and every song on the album for A Sacred Boar, my first record, was a chapter in an academic essay, if you want, put to song about caste and the different guises that casteism can take. There's a song about an honor killing, there's songs about anti-caste freedom fighters. There's, different chapters about different topics, and using caste as a jumping off point into each song. The new album, however, is taking an idea and then using that as a jumping point off into something else. And for me, it has to feel natural, but I feel like it's not the most romantic thing on paper, but I write songs like I'm writing an essay sometimes, where I need the narrative out in front of me, and the narrative has to be there. It has to make absolute sense for me to then make the next step, which is turning it into a song. And for me, it's all about making sure the message comes across as clear as day, because if the message isn't coming across, you kind of fail the role of being a protest singer, which is what I would describe myself as.
The idea of getting the narrative down before you start pushing forward with it, what does that process look like for you? That process of establishing a narrative and setting it down and having it there as a roadmap?
Yeah, I guess it's like when I set out to write an album about Bollywood, I knew what I was going to be covering. I knew I was going to be covering censorship of minority voices, which you can hear on my song The Pink Mirror. I knew I was going to cover nationalism and Bollywood as a tool for spreading nationalist rhetoric. I have a single called The Gariel, which is about that, etc. And a new single called Rupture of the Wheel, which will be out soon. It's also about nationalism. But for me, it's like taking the big topics that I want to be talking about and then thinking about what other nuances are there that I want to cover. And I think with both records, it's a trilogy that I'm working on, but of album 1 and 2 of this trilogy, it's like I've been working on the same notion of taking an idea that I really want to get across and looking at other jumping off points on it. And I guess sometimes I'll use a lyrical device. I'll use a setting or I'll use an anecdote as a lens through which to filter the point I'm trying to make. Like The Pink Mirror, for example, it's named for a film by queer Indian filmmaker Sridhar Rangayan, and that film is banned in India at the moment, but thankfully it's not banned in the UK, it's not banned in America, and that film has found an audience abroad, thankfully, thanks to streaming and DVD rentals and things. But the interesting thing about that song and it being banned in India is it's banned because it was made by an LGBTQ filmmaker who was telling a story from lived experience, but the censorship board deemed that too vulgar to show to audiences. But for a lot of people who aren't South Asian, this might not be as obvious, but a lot of mainstream platforms come with a very tokenistic and tone-deaf depiction of LGBTQ characters. Like, unfortunately, he has the same name as me, but there's this really big talk show host called Kapil Sharma in India, and he has the Comedy with Kapil show. And on that show, it's like a cis character who plays like a trans woman. And the whole point of it is that, you know, she's kidding herself about like transitioning, and that she's always the butt of a joke. And there's these very kind of like cross-dressing kind of, not in a panto way, but in a very hurtful, let's laugh at these people trying to just be themselves kind of way. And when these get greenlit and billions of people watch them, but films from lived experience aren't allowed to be told and are blocked altogether, that's me taking one device, the incidents of this film, The Pink Mirror, and using it to explore the greater issue of censorship in Indian cinema. And for me, I feel like it's like you were speaking to someone at a party or giving like a talk or something, and you're going, hey, how do I get you to care about this thing? And for me, it's like I have to use an example that's going to get you to engage with it on a micro level and then show you the bigger picture behind that. And so, yeah.
It's about finding like the relatability and the specificity.
Exactly. And it's about the idea that, you know, you want to appeal to the best nature of someone and go, hey, you look at a really tone-deaf depiction of like a person from a minority group dating back decades. Like, you know, you could look at blackface many, many decades ago. You could look at the depiction of, you know, people who weren't white or something in Western media and go, okay, we don't do that anymore. But here's the thing. In modern cinema and modern TV, mainstream modern TV in India, a lot of these stereotypes and things still happen. And for me, it's about calling it out and going, yeah, but you don't, this isn't happening because there's a dearth of stories. It's just that you're blocking all the ones from lived experience that portray LGBTQ Indians as like three-dimensional people with wants and needs. I don't fall into any of those categories. I'm straight and I'm cis, but I can see the need for wanting them to be three-dimensional people, for God's sake, you know. So yeah, I guess that's where it comes from.
Does, you know, the fact that you're saying that those films have found an audience worldwide, what was the film? Was it The Pink Mirror? Pink Mirror.
Yeah.
How is globalization something that's kind of undermining a lot of this now and undermining these kind of hurtful traditions that are in place in India at the moment?
It's a complicated game, I think, because when you think of globalization, I guess you think of things being homogenized for a specific audience. And sometimes you can think of it as, okay, my music isn't like, it's got an Indian classical influence, but it doesn't sound like what you would find at Glasgow Mela. It doesn't sound like Punjabi MC. It's a mix of different influences. And because I'm harder to pigeonhole, it's taken me a lot longer to build any traction in the music industry, be it Scotland or abroad. And that applies in any kind of medium, I think. Because of things being globalized and that homogenous, hey, we have time for this stereotype and this particular view of a certain minority or this view of a certain group. If you deviate from that even a tiny bit, you're all of a sudden sidelined for not towing a line a little bit. And yeah, there's definitely going to be, we need you to fulfill this stereotype or this tokenistic aspect of a production. But if you don't, then prepare for some pushback. And yeah, there's definitely some traditions that are feeling like they have to remove their own sense of nuance just to have any success. And it's a shame, but as more people find each other and communities build through the internet and those kind of means, I'm hoping those things, that'll obviously diminish over time.
You mentioned earlier on as well that you describe yourself as a protest singer, a protest songwriter. How has the balance of music and message kind of evolved in what you do through time?
I guess because I was playing music a lot longer than I was writing sonic essays about issues I cared about. I come from a background of like, I've got Indian classical musicians in my family, come from this kind of DIY grassroots music background where everyone in my musical ecosystems, all people I've met through DIY music, be it in Glasgow or Edinburgh where I used to put on gigs. But the music's really important. But I guess for me, I write albums around like a specific palette of voices. For the first record, I was listening to loads of like Bill Orcutt, Richard Dawson, a lot of industrial music, a lot of Scott Walker, and but also film soundtracks like filmmakers like Satyajit Ray, etc. And when I was writing the songs on the first album, I had this palette of voices that were consistent song to song, and that kind of kept me right in terms of writing an album. This new album's a lot more, it's like got a contemporary R&B kind of flavour to it. You know, there's as much Thundercat or Solange or D'Angelo influences in there as much as there is your Richard Dawson and your Indian classical stuff. So for me, there was this essay that I read about. It's from a book called Listen to This by the music critic Alex Ross from The New Yorker. I'd recommend everybody check it out. And in it, he describes the studio habits of different artists, and Björk was one that he described the habits of. And she has this habit where she writes each album for a specific palette of voices. Like she'll go, this album is going to be flute, violin, and like this specific electronic patch or something. And I was really inspired by that because it made me go, oh, it's almost like a creativity in its limitation, and for that I almost chose this kind of key palette of synths and this specific guitar sound, and I went, right, I'm not allowed to deviate from that, because not only does it make you creative within a specific medium, but it makes the album kind of hang together sonically. So yeah, I take the musical side of it really seriously. Like, I build a lot of my own synth patches inspired by producers like Arca and the late Sophie, etc. But yeah, the message is probably the main thing for me these days, but that doesn't mean that I shy away from the musical aspect of it. They're both really important to me.
To wrap us up, there was one last thing I wanted to touch upon, which is the energy of the records. And the first record has this kind of fizz about it and this energy that's pulsating through it.
Yeah.
Did the energy of Bollywood and those films kind of influence the soundscape on this new record in any way?
Yeah, 100%. Like, I come to this record as someone who grew up with Bollywood and is a massive fan of hundreds of Bollywood films. Like, you know, I grew up with those films in the background, and for me, it's not just about like, when I wrote the first record, caste system is bad. There's no binary around it. It's just bad. You know, it's like, there's no spectrum of opinion. But it's like, there is a binary. It's bad. But it's like, with the new record, it's more nuanced. I'm celebrating films like The Pink Mirror, but I'm lambasting nationalism and it being used as a tool for spreading nationalist rhetoric. Bollywood, that is. And for me, the new record's about maintaining the vibe that listening to Bollywood soundtracks growing up had. And for me, that vibe is definitely there. And for people who've listened to it, it seems to be the case as well. Like, you know, as I've finished the record now and it's out for mastering and we'll hopefully be dropping it in early 2022, like, I've obviously had to let people listen to it to gauge opinions and things. And yeah, a lot of people can definitely get that the influence of Bollywood soundtracks are there. It's a much groovier record with my live band in place, but I also find that I've gone from making very sonically confrontational music to making music that's going to maybe charm you into getting into a point. And the idea of folk getting into a point and dancing along to some things, maybe you're going to make them more likely to go home and Google something or wiki something. Because for me, it's never going to be about talking down to somebody because they don't already care about something or they don't already know about something. It's about, hey, have you considered this? Or hey, are you aware of this? Maybe you should be. And yeah, for me, the palette of sounds nucleates around the kind of music that you'd find in a Bollywood film. So 100%, yeah.
Thank you very much, man.
No, thanks so much for your time. Really appreciate it.